Recently, there was a detention and arrest of 5 student activists and the orders of the authorities at the Obafemi Awolowo University in Ife. Can you tell us what happened exactly on the 21st on the OAU campus that led to the arrest of these students?
Well, on the 21st of March, the authorities of the university sent some people to Moremi Hostel with a view to evict students, with the argument that they needed to renovate and that therefore, regardless of what the students were doing on campus, including those who were doing their projects, who were doing teaching practice and CWES, they should vacate the halls of residence. They went over to the hostel and nailed many doors, and they were throwing student properties from the topmost floor down. There are pictures on Facebook that shows the level of destruction of the personal effect of students. A group of students who are members of the Student Union Action Committee that was set up on October 4, 2017, during student struggle against bad welfare conditions. They went over to the hostel with a view to intervene in that matter. And in the process, the authorities invited the police, alongside with the university's own armed security, who arrested 5 of those students, including the chairman of that body. And they were all taken to the police station. And the next day, which was 22nd, they were taken to the magistrate's court, Ile-Ife, where they were arraigned on a 3-count charge. And then lawyers representing them sought for their bail. Alfred Adegoke, barrister, who led other lawyers, even appealed to the magistrate to release the student on self-recognition, because these are no criminal charges that require so much strenuous conditionalities for bail. But regardless of that, the magistrate imposed stringent bail conditions. He first said level 14, civil servant with 500,000 naira bail bond each, 2 of them. It was on the basis of the consistent, argument of the lawyers that these conditions are too stringent. They now reduced the conditions, the grade level, to level 12 or thereabout and above. And the whole intendment actually is that the university has an agenda to keep those students in prison for as long as possible. So that the role of the magistrate, unfortunately, in a judiciary that's supposed to be independent, is to facilitate the condition that will ensure that they would be there for as long as possible.
Now, let me quickly get this. In your release, you said that their travail is actually part of a long process of orchestrated assault on the fundamental rights of students by the despotic VC. Could you expatiate on this?
The Vice Chancellor of the university, Professor Eyitayo Ogunbodede, became VC just maybe middle of last year or thereabout, very recently. But he came and hit the ground running on the basis of an agenda to obliterate the student union, the student movement, including the staff unions of that campus. So that within 4 months of his assumption of office, 8 students, 4 undergraduates, 4 postgraduate students, had been victimized in one way or the other. The postgraduate students, 4 of them, complained about extortion and the unnecessary administrative delay of their programs. And their studentship was terminated. The 4 undergraduate students, were suspended on October 7 last year, following student protests against bad welfare conditions that I mentioned. That protest was held after several weeks that students had tolerated complete blackout, no electricity supply, and consequently, no water supply. At that period, the social media, Facebook particularly, was inundated with pictures of undergraduate students going to the stream to scoop water in order to have their beds or to cook. They held a congress on October 4. That congress sanctioned a peaceful protest, which held on the 5th and on the 6th. On the 6th, the management invited policemen, fully armed from More police station, who descended on the protesting students, arrested 10 of them, and took them over to their station, where they were detained overnight. It took intervention of lawyers, for them to be released on bail the next day. On October 7, the students who were perceived to have played leading role in that movement, one of whom is the National Secretary of the Education Rights Campaign, Omole Ibukun. Then there's the Vice President of the Student Union, and 2 others were suspended. Then following that, because the basis for all of these attacks on the rights of students is that the management was playing a script and following an agenda, which is either to take control of the student union and use it for their own design. And if that would not happen, to completely destroy it. So that in the previous student union elections, they had an interest in the election and they had played one role or the other. But the culture of OAU student unionism is that whoever wins offices of the student union would have to defend the interests of students in accordance to the provisions of the student union constitution. So that regardless of whether it was the management candidate that won or not, the mass of students, immediately after the union was inaugurated, started using their congresses and parliament to put responsibilities and tasks before that student union, to struggle and defend the interests of students. This was creating a crisis for the long-term agenda of the university authorities. At the same time, some of their perceived supporters within the leadership of the student union were equally resisting students' pressure on them to fight. So that, and at the same time, there were equally cases of mismanagement of union funds. But this point I'm making is to give you the background so that you can fully understand why we are where we are today. Because this is not, OAU is not the only place where we have had student protests over the last 1 year. But the level of response, and the usage of state forces indicates a completely sinister agenda. And this is clear because I myself have gone through that experience, in the hands of the authorities a few years ago. Over the past 20 years, similar experience like this has been a pattern on that campus. The agenda is always that it's either we control your union so that you are not radical and problematic for us in terms of the imposition of anti-poor policies, or we destroy it altogether. So that by November, students were angry that the only way the authorities could inflict this much attacks on their rights is only because the official leadership of the student union was not fighting hard enough. There have been many congressional resolutions putting tasks on the union leadership to fight, which were not respected. The union was also involved in several cases of misappropriation of public funds, so that by November, by late October rather, there were attempts for the students, to begin to do probe of the union officers. A parliamentary sitting was held, which had a resolution to probe the finances of the union leadership. At the same time, students were also calling for a Congress to take up the matter of the negligence of duty on the part of the union officers in respect of the defense of students' rights.
So,
So that by November 1st.
in other words, there seems to be a schism within.
Yes, there was a schism between
within the student union itself.
the pliant element within the union leadership who had been planted by the authorities and who were acting more or less, like a body on the struggle of students. They were not advancing student struggle. At the same time, they were dampening the mood. They were not carrying out congressional and parliamentary resolutions. And they were also preferring the finances of the union. So that by November 1st, something happened. There was an attempt by the leadership of the student union, which was to be probed to stop the parliamentary probe that had been instituted against it. And in the process, reportedly, some ultra-fascist elements, cultists, were imported from Ile-Ife town into the campus with a view to stop that probe. This led to a fracas on campus. This further infuriated students who, days after, called a Congress where the leadership of the student union, particularly the president of the student union, was impeached on the basis of negligence of duties, on the basis of inability to defend student interests, on the basis of his pro-management stance, as well as preferring the finances of the union. The management decided to show its hands because realizing that its pliant element in the leadership were being removed, he then decided to ban the union completely. And when it banned the union, it mobilized its forces. In fact, on November 6, I think, about 50 armed security men were mobilized to the student union building with a view to lock down that building. In the process, several students were brutalized who were trying to defend their union building, because the position of students was that we are students, we are members of our union, we are due-paying members of our union, we have a right to elect our leaders, we also have a right to discipline them, and there is no body who is a non-member of that union who should have a right to then come and interfere in the internal processes of that union, and that the university management was acting as a medium interloper in the internal processes of a student union, because it should be the best way to understand this is if the NSC, for instance, decides to take some actions against its leadership, if they perceive their leaders, not to be defending their interest, would it be acceptable for the government of Nigeria to then decide, to ban or proscribe the NSC? Would it not mean that the government is interfering in the internal processes of an independent union? That was the kind of crime the Vice Chancellor and the university management on that campus committed. And that is the background to all of this. And since that union was banned in November, the only platform that the students have been using to try to defend themselves, and at the same time, to also protect the entire student against the influx of cultists from town, because the immediate consequence of banning a union on any campus is that ultra-fascist element begins to rear their head. That platform is the Student Union Action Committee, which was set up in the thick of the struggle in October 4 last year. It is the leadership and membership of the Action Committee who are in prison today. So you can see, therefore, that the attack, the arrest and detention that is happening now is an effort by the university management to complete the work it started over the past few months to completely destroy independent student unionism on OAU campus. And that is what is happening at the moment.
Your organization, ERC, has been on the forefront calling for the unconditional release of these student leaders or activists. The court has actually placed some onerous conditions. Where are we going to see an end to this judicial harassment against the student activists?
We will not see an end to it until society itself is transformed. until this system, this capitalist system of fraud, is thrown out and replaced by a socialist democratic system. I make this point because we need to ask ourselves, why is the judiciary not independent? Why is the police, which is being maintained by taxpayers' money, your tax, my tax, is acting as the private thugs of university vice chancellors? It's only because the system we are operating is a system that requires to constantly protect itself and its functionaries from the anger of the mass of the people. What are the roles of vice chancellors? Vice chancellors are meant to implement the anti-poor educational policies of the government. And for that to succeed, they require the police, they require the judiciary to be able to suppress whatever dissent is coming up. Just a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, the same way students have been treated in OAU now was the same way the chairman of the non-academic staff union branch of that campus was also arrested and docked for trying to enforce the national strike of NASU in conjunction with the other unions fighting for their end allowance. The objective, of this apparatus of the state, whether the police or the judiciary, is not to defend the interest of ordinary people. It is basically to defend the system and maintain the system. That is why it is even difficult for oppressed people to obtain the services of a lawyer or to even pursue a case against the state, because the judicial process is not only cumbersome, it is also expensive for ordinary people to go through. You have today in the judicial system courts that are inundated by hundreds of cases with inadequate number of judges, inadequate number of judicial staff, so that cases can last for years without getting justice. It was just about a year or so ago that the student activists of University of Ilorin, who were expelled since the early 2000s, were able to win at the Supreme Court. The case lasted several years, more than 10 years. So that unless we completely dismantle this corrupt, inequitable capitalist system and enthrone a new system in its place, a system that will recognize that public education is a right, healthcare is a right, job is a right for all Nigerians, and that good living is a right for everybody who's a citizen of this country. Until we have that kind of system, there's no way the judiciary will be dependent. There's no way the police are not going to play the kind of role they are playing at the moment.
There seems to be a dearth of students' radicalism in recent years, and based on the analysis that you have, do we hope to see a resurgence of this student movement that's going to have a more viral impact, especially within the politics?
Definitely, because
how would that be achieved?
The situation is getting worse. The situation is getting worse. It would have been a different thing if the situation was getting better. Then we could be hoping, or the state, the ULA could be hoping that perhaps there will be no need for anybody to get radicalized. But the situation is getting worse. The condition of the education sector today and the condition of students is far worse than it used to be in the 80s. Yeah. That kind of condition would inevitably propel students to want to defend and fight for themselves. But of course, the issues that has been preventing students from fighting or from us having a viral student movement still remains. The leadership of NANS, which has completely collapsed ideologically. They have turned to yes men of different anti-poor political parties.
And giving awards.
Giving awards to different thieves and rogues in society. But most particularly is also the question of the absence or the decline of radical ideologies on the campus. Because in a situation where students are going through a lot of anti-poor attacks, their conditions are worse than used to be, they are bound to be looking for answers. If they don't have clear alternative ideas about how society can be better, there's no way they can also link their condition to the need to organize and fight back. Because people are not mad. People cannot just start fighting without even having an idea of what the problems are and what the solutions will be. In the universities today, the idea of capitalism is on the rise, neoliberal ideas. Entrepreneurship has become part of the curriculum in the universities, which is a way of telling people that even though you're educating yourself, your parents are paying through your nose, do not for any moment expect that this government is making any plan for you. The government is expecting you to educate yourself, to come out and fend for yourself. And when you just have that small business that you have started managing, they will descend on you in order to tax you out of the business. And that is selling to the extent that you now have a lot of young people who think that having your certificate is not the most important thing. After your certificate, you must also develop other skills. I have no problem with people developing their skills. But why should you go to study engineering and then you find yourself working in a, what can I call it? Working in a bank. That is society losing an engineer. And until young people have alternative ideas that says that education is not about me and you being able to put food on our table. No, that is the byproduct of education. It is not the main agenda and attainment. Education is to develop a new generation of people who can contribute positively to developing society in all areas, production, science, agriculture, everywhere, arts. So that it is to the interest of society to fund education in order to ensure that the right kind of education are given out. It is also to the interest of society to provide the jobs that those who are educated can do. Otherwise, the education will be a nullity if they don't give it back to society in terms of handling the different areas of our society. So that young people should not be accepting that idea that we should go and fend for ourselves. We should not wait on the government. We should say government must provide for jobs, not because we want to feed ourselves, but because we're not working. Me as an engineer, I've studied engineering, me not finding a job, does not just have a consequence on my own ability to feed myself. It has a long-term consequence on the development and future of my society, because that's an engineer that is lost to society. If I am a doctor, I study medicine, and I have to run out of this country to Canada, that means one less doctor in a society that has turned to an open-air mortuary. That is the kind of radical ideology that we need to use to mobilize young people out. Now, that when you are demanding for education and jobs, these are not selfish demands for ourselves. These are demands that are intrinsically linked to the future and sustenance of society. But we can only do this with the infusion of ideology, because they have succeeded so far. So that a lot of people, what they call it, gig economy now, which is there in Europe, it's also penetrating. People graduate, they do 8 to 5 jobs without any condition of service and nothing. That's the kind of future that is waiting for young people today. So that we can rebuild the student movement.
But there seems to be a problem, though. I mean, a lot of students themselves have so to say, self-censored themselves, so to speak, and saying that the students outside the political group feel like they're being left alone. Nothing is being done for them. So, I mean, they resign themselves to fate. How do we, change this orientation, reorientate them towards having a broad-based movement of students who are politically conscious?
That is where the work of organizations like the ARC, ANSA, and other groups becomes important. Because through those activities, we are trying to help every generation of students to connect back to their radical past, to discover their ideas. I always tell every young student I meet that Soweto would have become something else if I was not in OAU. I got to OAU and I found my calling. I met radical ideas. I found answers to the questions I've had over time as a young, inquisitive young person who was questioning just everything. But I got to OAU, I met ideological groups, left organizations, socialists, Marxists, Nkrumahist, all kinds of left organizations, Pan-Africanists. For a period, I was always in American attires. So OAU was a conundrum of ideas. And it reflects in all of us. So that many of us may not be rich, may not be whatever, but people can stand on our 2 legs anywhere, our 2 feet anywhere. on the basis of intellectual discussion. That generation that entered right from the mid-90s, before things started collapsing in the early 2000s. It is that culture that is under threat now. And one of the ways we can begin to counter this, because the ruling elites are behind this. They are countering it with soft power. They are also countering it with force. They introduce entrepreneurship. They use other means to introduce ideas of you don't need to struggle, you don't need radical ideas. Then a few dissident ones, they climb them into prison to serve as a one. What we need to do is to have a multifaceted approach to it. One is that we also must counter with our own alternative ideas. There must be more and more of academic programs on campus, political symposium, and many former student leaders must also find a way of constantly returning back when they are asked to come to address symposium or public meetings. Because some of these stories about the exploit of the student movement, about how much the student movement had fought in the past, can become a basis for igniting, a new generation. Because students need to know, for instance, that things were not this bad. Even those periods when we were fighting so voraciously, we were taken to prison, people were killed on the basis of fight, things were not this bad. People were not going into the streams to scoop water in order to have their bath. So then why are things this bad? And you don't even seem to be fighting. Look at what is happening at the University of Lagos, for instance. None of us in here can go to any Western University of Lagos and you'll be able to breathe because everywhere is suffocating, the toilets are terrible. And that is in the mega city, for instance. And the professors, the vice chancellors there, see nothing wrong in it. Those students need to know that the University of Lagos was never like that in the past. And that one of the central demands of the student movement, even at the period, was for more hostels to be built. But now, even the few hostels that exist, students are living like pigs. Students need to know, for instance, in OAU, that where they read now, they use as reading rooms, used to be the old cafeterias, where students used to eat chicken, a full meal. You can also invite your friends from Ife time, invite your girlfriends, and they will eat a full meal, at a very cheap rate. They need to know all of this, and they need to know that this was the same economy, this was the same Nigeria, under which all of this was achieved. And that if it could be achieved in those periods, why we are not achieving it now is because you have a system, you have a ruling elite that does not believe that this should be done. Nigeria has enough resources, enough money to fund education adequately, to return education back to what it used to be, and even to take it higher. But for the ruling elite, it is not going to happen. Why? Because that means that they will have to give away their profit. They have to give away the millions and billions of naira they are stealing. Look at how much politicians in the National Assembly are earning legitimately in quotes. Nobody is talking of the dollars they are putting in their big caps, like one of them the other time. Nobody is talking of how much money they are getting, just surpass budget of the MDAs and all of that. Nobody is talking of how much money lobbyists are using to bribe these lawmakers. And nobody is talking about the executives who have billions of naira security votes. Nobody is talking about the huge resources that politicians and multinationals are stealing in the Nigeria data. So that when you tabulate all of this and calculate it, you realize that Nigeria has enough resources, to take care of 2 times the current population of the country. So that nobody will come and tell us that our population is a problem. We have resources and we have the human resources also. Because a population is not a disadvantage. Exactly. If that population is educated and well-skilled, it can become a basis, for taking society to a new level. And that they need to realize that this is a country that can be better than it is currently. And it's only by struggle that they can be able to have the kind of Nigeria they want. And that struggle starts on their own campuses. They need to see the link between their struggle on the campuses with the struggle to save Nigeria. They also need to see the link between the repression on campuses, and the success of the Nigerian ruling elite. Somebody like me will not exist today if the repression of the OAU management had succeeded. At a point, they wanted to kill us. But I understand now much more clearly that what they were preventing from happening is for someone like me to play the kind of role and play Nigerian society today. They know that the university can become the recruiting ground for the young people brilliant, clear about what is wrong with Nigeria, clear about what the solutions are, the university can become the breeding ground for those who will come to rescue this country. So the university authorities have become the gatekeepers of the system. They are helping this decadent system by slamming and clamping students in prison, by suspending and suppressing student revolt. The idea is to create dummies out of the university system. People who come to larger society, they will not be able to ask questions. They will not be able to topple the apple cart. They will not be able to rock the boat of the ruling elite. And we are not going to allow this. And that is why the students themselves must realize that their struggle on the campuses is linked with the struggle to rescue this country.
Soweto, thank you very much for your insightful analysis. We appreciate your comment.